Whether you know it or not, your attachment style is affecting your approach to sales. And we're going to tell you here how to work through that. So, today I wanted to talk about attachment styles and how it affects you in your sales business. Now, guys, look, there is an influx of huge amount of data online about how to sell. There's internet gurus out there you can throw a rock and hit them that are going to tell you how to close cold calls, how to overcome objections, how to close big ticket sales. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. There's some that take a calm, cool, and collected approach and systemically teach you how to overcome some of this stuff. There's other ones that are, super blown, like over the top. They show you their fancy car, their big house, try to validate their success with you to get you to buy into their program. I'm not going to do any of that here. That's not the purpose of this. I will tell you there's nothing wrong with those. Taking in as much information and learning about those techniques is great. What I wanted to do is take a minute to talk about the underlying psychology, your personal psychology, and how it affects you in the sales process, and how you can mitigate some of the things that are positive, accentuate the positive stuff and mitigate some of the negative stuff that goes along with your attachment style. So, guys, if you don't know what attachment styles are, there are four attachment styles that most people fall into. And to give you a little bit of background, is how I learned this stuff. Before I met my wife and understood what her attachment style was, and I understand what mine is, and we have this relationship and it works. I went through a really bad breakup a few years ago, and some things were said about me that made me really want to reflect inward so that I could understand me better, so that I could be better in a relationship. And it has really helped me in my sales journey, as far as helping people when I coach them, helping my own personal sales journey. And I feel it's good information for you to have to understand, so you can help it to help model how you are as a salesperson by understanding the underlying psychology. And there's a spectrum of attachment styles. So at one end, you have what's called an anxious, preoccupied person. Okay. And at the other end, you have what's called a secure person. And then in the middle, there's a fearful avoidant and a dismissive avoidant. Okay. You're going to know when you hear this where you fall in this scale. Okay. And I'll kind of go through them briefly. Now, look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not here to play psychologist. I'm here to give you the information that I learned on my journey. Hopefully you can take some of it and move forward in your journey. And look, we're already a couple minutes into this. It's going to be about a 7 or 8 minute video. So if you want to tap out now, you can tap out now. Okay. So at the one end, it's anxious, preoccupied. These are the people that get into a relationship and need that constant validation. They're kind of up their partner's butt a little bit. Hey, is everything okay? How am I doing? Is this all right? Do you like this? Blah, blah, blah. And they are super clingy and needy people in the relationship. Okay. The other end of the spectrum is the secure person. They get into relationships. They had a real good upbringing. Their parents told them they loved them. There was no, hostility in the home. And they meet somebody, they hang out with them. It's cool. They all know their role, and there's not a lot of relationship friction because they're secure, their partner's secure, and they're able to work in conjunction with one another and understand their space. The two in the middle are a little funky. So the dismissive avoidant person is the person in a relationship who comes on really strong in the beginning, but when the relationship gets a little bit too heavy, they start to pull back. And it's a protection mechanism in their body because growing up in their household, their parents kind of told them children are seen and not heard. Their emotions weren't met. They weren't allowed to express themselves. So they use that dismissive avoidant attachment style as a protection so that they don't get too deep into something and expose themselves. So that is the dismissive avoidant. And then the fearful avoidant, which is probably the most difficult, or the most difficult to track of the four attachment styles, and it's also the one that I am. Okay, so what's with the fearful avoidant person, what makes it difficult is I can fall anywhere on that scale. So it's like being in the multiverse in Marvel. They jump from multi universe to universe. As a fearful avoidant, I can go from being on the anxious, preoccupied side to the secure side very easily through that process, depending on who I'm interacting with. So it's very difficult to deal with me. I already know that, and part of working on that is knowing that to how do I accommodate different things. Okay, So you're going to know where you fall on one of those four attachment styles. So some days I could be super clingy. Some days I could be very dismissive. Some days I can be non-communicative. Some days I'm over communicating with my partner. How that affects you in the sales process is key. Okay. And we're going to get into some of the pitfalls and trials and tribulations that you can deal with as far as how it affects you in the sales process. So first, we're going to talk about the anxious, preoccupied person. So the hard part with an anxious, preoccupied person in the sales process is this: when they are trying to get appointments or when they don't get a sale, they take every no like a stab in the chest. Like it just kills them that these people are not going to work with them, that they've been rejected, and it almost forces them, if you're in this category, where you're overly reaching back out. You have a lead that said, "Hey, no, I don't want to meet," but you're constantly following up with them and you're trying and trying and trying to get them into your sphere, and you work overly hard on that person when there's probably not a lot of stuff there with them. Now, the upside to that anxious attachment is once you build the relationship, you're so attentive to that person, the client or the sponsor or the person you're working with, you tend to build a really strong relationship with them where you're ultra servicing their account. So if you can get through the rejection side of it and get the account, if you're anxious preoccupied, you usually do really well in the management of the account. So that's the con and the pro to being that attachment style in the process. And you know we can get into deeper dives on each one of these, and that's what, if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me and we could talk about some of the ways to combat these things with your attachment style. But the first part is understanding which you are and some of the pros and cons that go with it to how you figure out how to get over it. Okay. At the other end of the spectrum, it's a secure attachment style. So one of the things with secure attachment people is they tend to underuse urgency, and they don't have a lot of aggressiveness in sales. They're kind of just like, okay, we're cool. I'm either going to get it or I'm not going to get it, which can be a negative when you're trying to sell people that low key approach. Okay, but when they do get the sales, the relationship is pretty cool. Like they have a good interaction with that person once they sign them up. So the secure one, the downfall is that you're not as urgent in getting the sale, but when you get it, usually work out pretty well. The interaction is pretty open and dialogue and straight up with the sponsor or the client when you get them. The dismissive avoidant, the really big pro to being a dismissive avoidant is the no's don't bother you. You're really good at cold calling because there is a sense, a level of detachment with the dismissive avoidant. So when the cold call, when they hang up on them or tell them no, they're just kind of like, meh, all right, I'll move on to the next one. Okay. The downside to the dismissive avoidant is in the negotiation process because, like I said, in that relationship style, when it gets too heavy, they tend to pull back. So if they have to do a lot of negotiation in closing the deal, sometimes that's where they fall out because they kind of curl up. They don't want to actually have that confrontational back and forth sales negotiation. So you need to look out for that if you're a dismissive avoidant and understand how to combat that. And then the fearful avoidant, one of the pros with being a fearful avoidant is this. When you're a fearful avoidant, it means you grew up in a household where there was a little bit of chaos. Mom and dad had stuff going on, or you had siblings that had drama, or all that stuff. So you were always in tune with what was going on, which is where I'm at. Where it helps me in the sales process is I really am good at reading people. I can read somebody relatively quickly, whether I'm coaching somebody new to see whether or not they have what it takes to make it, or really good at evaluating someone when I'm on a sales call early on to see whether or not this person has legs and they're going to close. My downside is the account management side. Okay, so when I get into the account management, I need somebody to handle the day to day of that stuff because my brain is disorganized in a way where if it gets high enough, I can handle it, but I need someone day to day to manage the relationship once I close that new business. So the biggest key with these attachment styles and how you work through them is having systems in place. But knowing some of the pitfalls ahead of time helps you to manage those issues to make sure you're putting systems in place to be successful. So, if you would like to learn more about how you use your relationship attachment style and accentuate the positive and downplay the negative, you can reach out to me. There'll be a QR code in this link, and we can start to dive into how we help you do better at sales. Now, again, if you want someone that's just going to tell you how to overcome an objection on a phone call, show you how successful they are by letting you see their car in their house, or someone who's going to tell you ways to break down those walls in getting cold calls and getting through gatekeepers. There's a ton of that out there. The purpose of this is to dive into the psychology of it, to see how we make you a better person and how we get you to be the best version of yourself while being the best version of yourself in sales. So hopefully this helped you a little bit. And if you need further information, feel free to reach out to me and we can dive a little deeper. See you soon.